Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Linda Yellen. I'm the presenter of the workshop today titled Why Search for Your Birth Origins or for Your Sons and Daughters. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then I want to get a chance and get an understanding of who we have here. I'm sure you're interested in that as well. I'm an adoptee. I searched for my birth family, my birth mom and her family about 8 years ago, and my birth father and his family about 4 years ago. And I have a continuing relationship with them. And I'm a clinical social worker, and I direct a program called Post-Adoption Resources Center. It's sponsored by Lutheran Adoption Service, yet it is a community-wide, non-denominational program. And we service adoptees, adoptive parents, birth parents, and professionals by providing education, consultation, support services, and counseling. We've done a variety of different things with teens, family workshops, and part of our program and our services to adult adoptees and birth parents is we have ongoing support groups separately for adoptees, adult adoptees, and for birth parents. We've run reunion workshops, and I'm also an active member of our local search and support group, Adoption Identity Movement. So that's a brief rundown of what I do. And prior to founding the Post-Adoption Resources Center, I was in private practice specializing in services to the Triad members, and I know that it came from my own search and the recognition of a lot of gaps in the community, which is not unknown to anybody here, I'm sure. What I'd like is, let's start with a show of hands, okay, to get a little idea of the variety of people that we have here. How many of you are adoptees? Okay. How many of the adoptees have already searched? Okay. How many are in, I'm sorry?
In the process.
Okay. How many are in the process of searching? Okay. How many of you aren't sure if that's what you want to do? Okay. All right. Good variety of that point. How many of you are birth parents? Okay. 3. How many of you have already had reunions? Okay. That's a half reunion. You've made contact, but there's not been a response.
A response, but no reunion.
Response, but no reunion. Okay. And still looking. Okay. How many of you are mental health professionals? Okay. And of the ones that are mental health, how many of you also wear another hat in the triad? Okay. Real combination. How about adoptive parents? Okay. We've got a real mix. Who did I leave out? Good. No one. Okay. How many of you have been to AAC conferences before or are members of your local search groups? How about some first-timers here to the conference? Okay. First-time conference attendees as well as really being involved in this kind of a okay, well, welcome to everybody, and a special welcome to the first-time people, because it is a conference that can bring up a tremendous amount of personal issues, and it can be very overwhelming, and it can really plummet one into a lot of different feelings that it's really a defrosting type of a thing. And for some people, it's like you're frozen for a while, and all of a sudden you come into a convention or go into a search and support meeting, and all of a sudden it's, you know, instant heat, and things can resurface and really start to explode. It's a real roller coaster of emotions. And what I'd like to do before we really get into the presentation is to comment not only for the first-time people, but just in general, because issues resurface for people. It's not necessarily just the first time you come. I've been involved in AAC for 8 years now, and it is very different for me to be coming back year after year, very active in the support groups. But that doesn't mean a person is forever done. That whether there's a reunion, and there's reunion aftermath, and even though there can be stability in reunion aftermath, things still resurface. And I believe that just in life in general, that things are never completely finished, that things will come up, and sometimes hit a person in a way that they really had expected some resolution, but that's all what it's all about, loss and grief and anger sometimes resurfacing. But especially for the people who're not familiar with that kind of process, know that you're not alone and connect with other people. We have a real good diversity in here. I'm real excited. I was hoping for that. People who are thinking about searching, people who already have, people who are just wearing different hats and that type of thing. So know before you leave, if you hear something from someone else, go up to them. That's part of what we're all about. Not only our interest in finding some information about ourselves, whether we're an adoptee or a birth parent and trying to find the child that was released, but just trying to connect. So try and do that. What I'd like to do in regards to subject matter and format, I've got some information that I want to present, and I will do that, but I also want to use this time for people to ask questions. I want it to be somewhat informal, where if there's something that I'm being unclear about, feel free to interrupt me, but we will have times during the next 2 hours to really have some discussion, because I have some material to present, but that doesn't mean that that's the gospel. People have different experiences, and I can share with you some of my professional experiences in what motivates adoptees and birth parents to search, what goes on afterwards, but we have a wealth of information right here in this room, and we were all at the beginning stages, whatever those beginning stages might have been at our own time. Some of the things that I'll cover will be some of the whys. Why do people search, whether it be an adoptee perspective or a birth parent perspective? Looking at what I call some of the healthy and unhealthy signs in search and in motivation. A little bit about preparation of search, and it's not necessarily going to be in a clear outline format where you're going to say, okay, here are healthy signs and here are unhealthy signs. It'll somewhat be interwoven in the presentation. I'm sure with some of the dialogue, you'll get a chance not only from your experiences but from others to have a gut feeling of what shifts the balance, what moves somebody from their decision that they're dealing with adoption issues, but then what puts them over that line to start to search. So that'll be the general format that I'll use. Welcome. We had a show of hands already, and we have a real diversity of people here, adoptees, birth parents, some people in search, some already that have. So if you just briefly tell us what role you are, if you're comfortable.
Great. I'm a birth mother, and I toy with searching and have done. It's a big obstacle.
Yes, yes. Okay, welcome.
I'm Pat Jansen. I'm an adoptive mom, 7 and 17-year-old, but I'm also a birth mother of 20. I've been searched for by the oldest one, searched for and found my 24-year-old and semi-rejected.
I'm an adoptee. I've completed my search, and I'm also a searcher for other people at this point for basically Wisconsin and Illinois.
Okay, well, welcome. Let me get into the why do people search. That's always an interesting question. It's so individualized, yet there are many, many commonalities. And I'll be speaking from the perspective both from the adoptee's point of view and from the birth parent's point of view. And if at any time it sounds like it's more one or the other, that's okay, because there are some differences, of course, in their process and in motivation. I'll outline just a couple of different ones, and then I'd like people just to add, because they're really, there's a list of thousands of reasons, but we can go through a couple of the main ones. The why search is because it's better to know than not to know. The need to have information is finally outweighing the ability to live with the not knowing. I see lots of nods over on that end over there. And for some of you who are still in the process of deciding, that balance, the juggling act, the scale shifting, I can assure you not only from personal experiences but from professional experience, that the decision to search is not all of a sudden going to be so clear that it's okay, I absolutely need to do that, and there's never any reservations. There are reservations, and there needs to be continued reservations, and that's one of the healthy signs as well, where a person recognizes that it's just not going to be that simple. Okay, I'm going to search and it's going to be easy. There's lots of different types of issues with that. Another reason why people embark on a search is because somebody's pushing them to do that. Whether it be a spouse, whether it be a sibling, whoever it might be in their support system or lack of support system, that's what's going on. Sometimes it's medical and justifiable medical reasons. Sometimes it's a psychological mindset where medical becomes the belief that allows the person to go ahead and embark on a search. Where even on an unconscious level, but even a little bit of a conscious level, somebody might say to themselves, or they might be willing to admit out loud, yes, I have justifiable medical reasons, or I'd like to know because now I have children. But then they're also able to say, well, there's also a little piece of me that's curious. I'd really like to know who they are, what kind of people, what the real reason was. But there's a psychological process to the need to start to search. And many times when people get a little information, then they're able to say, okay, now I want a little more. Okay, now I know this, I want this. That's also part of human nature. And it's also part of protectiveness that it's very difficult to say when we look at the issue of why search. Because I would like to meet somebody who I think very highly of, and I'm really glad that I know, and I'd like to have an ongoing relationship. That's real difficult for most people to say, and in reality it should be difficult from a psychological point of view, because there needs to be some protectiveness. Because the unhealthy reunions, the ones where people are really setting themselves up and setting up whoever they're looking to find, are the ones who are feeling that a search is going to cure it all, that it's going to take care of everything. So when we look at the motivations of why search, it also depends on where the person is at their beginning process. For some, whether it be the adoptee or the birth parent, as I said before, a person can be frozen. Okay, they can just kind of turn feelings and turn issues off. In my work with birth parents, we have some who will say that they've thought about it every day of their life and it's been a festering wound. For others, they've used their defense mechanisms and they've not had a conscious thought about it. Lots of their behavior and the reactions around maybe subsequent children or not having additional children, feelings of self-esteem, shame, whatever it might be, has been a direct result of releasing that child for adoption. But it's not always been an absolute conscious thought. So depending on where the people are at, the why search is different. Yet there are some unique aspects to it. The need to know, whether it be from the perspective of the birth parent saying, I can't bear going to the shopping mall anymore, going to the market, and all of a sudden all these kids that I never really paid attention to before, all of a sudden every 5-year-old, I'm thinking about the child that I released. Or at times it could be the birth parent, the child that they released might have been 10 or 20 at this point in time, but they're still looking at babies. Okay, so it's not necessarily, one doesn't always age the child as a process. And rest assured, adoptees don't age the birth parents either in many ways. And neither do adoptive parents, and that's always an interesting dilemma when I do some training, is I'll tell adoptive parents, and the same thing with adoptees, we have to stop. I mean, we could be 35 or 40 years old and we're thinking of the birth mother as young, okay? We have to recognize that they get older. Right, I mean, we're 40, but the birth mother is still 20. It doesn't work like that. So we have to start to recognize, and those are healthy signs. Those are healthy types of signals in regards to preparation to search. The why search, the preparation to search, the readiness to search, they're all interwoven. So as I speak, it can't be just in one column and then clearly in another. They all are part of the process into the why search and the readiness.
Linda, something I found, and I don't know if you have or not, many times speaking from an adoptive point of view, when adoptees search, they say they're looking for medical information and nationalities. They don't know if they were, given the right nationality. And I find that in reality, they say they really don't care about having a relationship with their birth family, but in reality, that is really what they are looking for.
Yeah, I believe that's true with some people, as I said, when it's easier and it's psychologically more protective when someone will say, well, I'm interested in some medical information, would like to at least get a chance to meet them or to see a picture. But who doesn't want to be accepted? That doesn't mean that the adoptee or the birth parent who needs to search, who wants to search, feels that they have to have an ongoing relationship, because if one decides to search based on the expectation that that's what they're going to have, I can assure you that that's an unhealthy signal, that that's a warning sign right there, because that's not necessarily how it's going to be. But in any kind of a new relationship, to imagine, well, geez, I think I'm going to have a friend, I've never even yet met them, and I wonder who they're going to be and what they're going to be like, and I hope everything goes well. It's very difficult. We have to start at the beginning. And there's a certain type of psychological protectiveness that we all need. And I know even for myself, when I started search, my daughter was a couple years old, and I know that it was real important for me to have medical information. There was no question about it. But there was also a part of me that was very curious and interesting, and the need to know started to outweigh the other aspect of it. Yet we all have to recognize the why search has to do with what are the other people like. For the birth parent, did I make the right decision? Is that child okay? Sometimes we hear people have rescue fantasies as to the aspect of a birth parent saying, I just know something's wrong. I just know that that child or that adult adoptee needs me. And I'm not going to deny that there haven't been a couple of cases where the birth parent has found and the adoptee might have been thinking for that 3-month or 6-month interval the same aspect of, I'd like to connect. The fantasy aspect of why search, it's all part of the package. I'm not going to sit here and say, be void of fantasies. That's impossible. We're human beings and we're all going to have them, but the kind of fantasies we have and our expectations to reality needs to be checked. It's very normal to want to have a decent reunion. It's very normal to want to find information that we find acceptable. That's not to discount the fact that there might be some people who are looking for negatives. Okay, just as if they were not adopted. Not everybody is looking for positives in their life. They're sometimes looking to stir up some difficult issues. But in the why search, there are so many different kinds of things as to the motivation. One of the primary motivations, and again it goes back to the balancing of the scales, is that the thoughts of adoption, the thoughts of wanting to find information that's becoming so consuming to you, that those are signals again for motivation to search. What other kinds of things can people mention for the whys?
For me, it was a burning need to see somebody with some feature that was like me.
The need to connect physically, the need to know.
And for me, my bottom line I knew was that I could not stop, even if they were dead, until I'd found photographs at least.
I need to know that my child was alive.
The need to know the child was alive, the need to see someone who looked like them.
The need to find out all this missing information, to sort of find a completeness or a wholeness without, this information is missing.
Missing gaps, missing pieces.
I think the need to know why I was actually put up for adoption, because there are so many times and so many stories we hear, like the parents were killed in a car accident, and whether this was in actuality or what.
The need to understand the real reason and to hear it from that person.
My oldest son was a found because he needed to, like you said, fill in the missing pieces that he never felt complete. And after he found, he said, "Now I have all my pieces."
The need to feel complete, the need to know that there's something out there that will help to fill in those thoughts.
Converse to the need to know the circumstances is the need to tell the circumstances.
That's right, from the perspective of the why search.
Yeah.
The need for the birth parent to explain,
The justification.
to let them know that there were good reasons, okay, and for the birth parent to make sure that that adoptee understood that. Okay. So it's a combination of not just telling, but in that telling, and I can't say specifically from you, but in my work with birth parents, there's levels of the need to tell, the need to express it, but also the need to have that adoptee understand.
And also, I think for, as a birth mother, for the child to know that you love them.
Yeah.
For the child to know that they were loved. These are all important, all different reasons, and many people are motivated by a combination of those. And we could go on and on. Is there any others that somebody feels that they would like to contribute at this point? I mean, we can talk for hours about the whys.
I'm a birth parent, but based on things I think I pick up at at meetings of all members of the triad, that on the part of some adoptees, there's a sense of confronting the birth parent, a desire to confront the birth parent with their feelings of rejection.
For an adoptee who has some unresolved anger,
Yeah.
okay, the need sometimes that the adoptee is angry, okay. Now, when I made the comment about unresolved anger, we all have unresolved anger. And my feeling is we will go to our grave with unresolved anger, and whether we were adopted or not adopted. There's unresolved different feelings depending on how much it interferes in our lives. We all have had losses. We know many non-adopted people. We know many people who were not birth parents, and they've got their issues with their parents, their issues with their siblings, their issues with society. But I think that's an additional important piece, that there are some situations where the motivation is not what I would consider healthy. That doesn't mean that there isn't unresolved anger and that the adoptee isn't still having that, or the birth parent still having some issues. But to search, to blast the birth parent, okay, to take that out, there are some issues that need to be taken care of. But hopefully in those kinds of situations, I've dealt with adoptees like that they can still go ahead and recognize that there are those feelings. I'm not at all prescribing that readiness to search means that you no longer have anger, because that's impossible. It's just resurfaces at different times, and especially during the time of search and reunion, even when an adoptee finds a birth parent who they truly think very highly of, and there's a very nice ongoing relationship, anger resurfaces. Not necessarily at the anger of that person at how they are at this present day, but anger at why she couldn't keep me, anger at, look how wonderful this person is. I finally see someone who looks like me. Maybe we share some same interests or hobbies. Anger at, because anger is part of a loss. Anger is part of a grief reaction. But there are certain situations where someone is angry. Just the same thing, a birth parent might be motivated by being angry at the attorney, being angry that the adoptive parents might have been involved in the adoption. There's all kinds of different circumstances.
My experience has been that what some adoptees do with their anger is decide not to search because she doesn't deserve to know.
Right, right, yeah. And I've heard that and seen that, and I think that sometimes is a protection for the adoptee, because then they're able to almost say exactly what you're saying, Penny. She doesn't deserve to know me, which is almost saying, I'm so angry, she didn't want me, so forget her.
I don't want her.
I don't want her, but there's a scare, because if one feels terribly rejected, it's very hard to get to the point of balancing out the motivation for search. And rest assured, I am not saying that someone has to resolve their feelings of rejection, resolve their feelings towards their parents, depending on if they had a part in the release or the adoption plan, but to recognize that you have these variety of feelings, and that that's part of what motivates a person to search. They don't necessarily have to be unhealthy motivations. It just depends on where you put those feelings in the process. And that's why I believe so much in groups and to talk about it. We can go on in regards to the whys, and as we continue, some of the other types of things might come up as well. But it's important for people to know that there's a lot of commonalities, but then there's also a lot of differences in regards to search.
I've worked with a lot of adoptees who have been kept by their mothers. Father disappeared early in the picture, and they have based all their expectations. You know, when I find my father, everything's going to be okay. And that, to me, is a very unhealthy.
Absolutely. That's in regards to some of the unhealthy aspects, is trying to believe that a search is going to cure it all. There's no question about that. That's one of the biggest unhealthy motivations. And the same thing from the perspective of the birth parent. I'm going to find and I'm going to be a part of that child's life. Sometimes the person can really monitor that and they can feel that they can sustain the role, but it's very common. And in most cases, it's very difficult to get a role maintained right away. It has to stabilize. But we also have the motivation of some people who really, on a conscious or unconscious level, want to get their baby back, want to believe that they will be able to reparent that child. It's an understandable fantasy. It's very understandable, but it's unrealistic, very unrealistic. Let me look at some of the aspects of preparing to search and what goes into that, and then some more of the unhealthy signs, both for the adoptee and for the birth parent. But that's a very important one to recognize, that if one feels that this reunion is going to take care of it all, it's just not. And in most cases, what I've learned from people who feel that way is that that's how they might look at life anyways, very black and white. The aspect of, if this happens, then things will be okay. And probably many of us were like that at some points in our life. I think it's a growth process that we learn that life has got its ups and downs no matter what. And that even though we might fill in some major missing pieces, there's no question about it, that doesn't take care of the variety of ups and downs that are in life anyways. And sometimes we can heal in one area, and then we have, just because of our normal sense of self, all of a sudden there's other areas that we see we need some work in. And I remember there was an earlier time in my life that, not that I expected the reunion to do that, but just an understanding, well, if this happens at work, then that'll be okay, or this or that. Well, you take care of one thing, something else comes up. So Gilda Radner, it's always something. I mean, it's really true, and I believe that it's a growth process, not just around the issue of adoption and search, but it's just a belief. And when we have unrealistic expectations of reunion, when we have unrealistic expectations that the birth family for an adoptee, if they find that, will really have a sense of connectedness. And there are some adoptees who are devastated by the fact that they find someone in their birth, that they don't find anybody in their birth family they look like. That's a real major blow to a sense of self when that's what one was looking for. So in recognition of preparation, that's some of the other things that I want to cover, and that's what helps a person decide, should they search. And one of the other purposes of or benefits that I hope people could get out of today, for the people who've already searched, to use some of this as a reflection of what motivated you in the first place. Because along the continuum, we get something and then we're ready for something else. And sometimes we need to just stop and reflect, was what I wanted to happen, did I get that need met? Did I find my child alive? Do I finally know? That doesn't mean that there aren't continuing issues that pop up. But if the original need was met. That doesn't mean don't have future needs. It means let that one piece fill part of the puzzle. Let that one piece fill some of the missing gaps to say, I'm glad I know that. But then it's normal to continue to want. We're human beings, and we can't be void of that and know that we have the rights to want more in our life. But how we proceed to get it is all part of what we need to do in relationships. But in regards to preparation, one of the key questions that I ask adoptees and birth parents in their thoughts about searching is, what is it that they want to have happen? Not what they're telling the social worker they want or what they're telling their friend, but they need a place to just be able to verbalize it all and to let your fantasies out, your wildest dreams, your hopes. Get in touch with those. We all have them. And then look at what it is that are your worst fears. What's the worst thing that can happen? Call it, what's your catastrophic fantasy? We all have them. Not necessarily just about search and reunion, but other things of, how we envision our lives. Looking at the desires, the fantasies, being able to be in touch with the desires of whether it be an ongoing relationship or the kind of birth history that you might want to find or the kind of adoptive parents that you hope your child was raised with, whatever it might be, we have those kinds of feelings and expectations and fantasies. And the more you defrost, if you were frozen, the more the things are bubbling and surfacing for you, the more able you are to verbalize them. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go to your search and support group of 50 or 100 people and sit there and saying, this is everything that I want, okay? Because you're laying yourself out and being extremely vulnerable. That might be a vehicle for you. It also might be a vehicle where you can talk to 1 or 2 people, a small group, a friend, even if they're not adopted or a birth parent. Write it down. If you don't feel that at this point in your process that you have someone that you can verbalize this, write down what you'd like to have happen. Write down your catastrophic fears. Write down your expectations. And write down what it is in a realistic way of what you would like to find out. Because they're all different pieces in the process. And many of us do this in a jumble in our head. Many of us didn't even know we were going through that process sometimes until we met other people who were able to kind of ask us the kind of questions. But you have to be your own support person as well. There's never going to be a time where you're going to say to yourself, okay, this is it. I know that this is just the absolute thing I need to do without ever having some uncomfortable feelings about it, as I had mentioned before. It's still going to be scary. But in the process of looking at the preparation phase, the catastrophic fears, then you're in a better position to decide if you'd rather take those risks. Another key question in that of your fantasies and your expectations is, can I handle the things that I will find in my worst fears? That's real important. You need to ask yourself that. Can I handle that? That doesn't mean, will I not grieve? Will I not be angry? Will I not have feelings about it? Of course you will. No one wants to find things that upset them, but in most cases, there will be certain aspects that just don't sit right to the continuum of finding things that are very difficult for people, whatever it might be. And we don't need to list all those just by being here, or just your own visions. You can visualize what, for you, would be difficult. But can I handle that? And will I be okay afterwards? Those are real important questions to ask yourself. If you're still thinking about search, as well as in the process of search, and even for those who've already had a reunion, to re-ask yourself those questions, because that all has to do with helping one heal, helping one grow, and helping one come to terms with the decision to search. Question?
I think the one thing for an adoptee, why they wouldn't look is their adoptive parents' feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was my biggest reason for not doing it for years and years, was that it was just a subject we never talked about at home.
Mm-hmm.
We barely talked about adoption, so we wouldn't talk about looking for this person. And I have to admit, to this day, my mother doesn't know how much money I spend and how much time I spend on this.
Mm-hmm. So the scares of, will my adoptive parents find out? How will they feel? Will I still be part of that family? Will they know? I mean, there are some people that come to various groups and they're terrified to walk in the door for fear that they might see someone who the information is eventually going to get back to their adoptive family, or for the birth mother or birth father coming out of the closet. And those are major steps. It's not even just a major step in searching, it's a major step in just coming out of the closet and expressing a need to connect with other adoptees. That's another important piece. The things that I'm outlining in regards to preparation, something that takes time, and everybody's time frame is different. For some, taking the step to actually activate a search, you could have been thinking about this for 3 or 5 years. For others, they might have seen something on TV and all of a sudden the suddenness of, this is really what I need to do. So everybody's time frame is different. Activating a search, calling up and becoming a member of a search and support organization, for some, it's going to take them a while just to sort it out. Don't feel pressured into moving any faster than you're ready to. But on the other side of it, you need to help yourself not feel as stuck if you are feeling stuck. Because again, it's a real fine balance. Not to go too fast, to spend some time in preparation, to really look at the whys and to decide that you're really ready to handle it. And one of the things that we have found is that with preparation, no matter what someone does find, if they're willing to deal with some of the scares, that the reality is it's much better for them to know than not to know. Because what ends up happening, and again, it's a real double bind. You know, those scales, not only are they kind of neck and neck, but, you know, they're knocking each other, because a person can feel that they're stuck no matter what they do, because they're scared many times to take the risks and to find out the variety of different things that might be difficult for them. But on the other hand, all the things that they're afraid of, all the things that one's conjuring themselves up with, those scares can be causing more distress than what they really actually might find out. And each person is the best gauge for when you take that next step. But one of the things that I recommend for people who are just in the thinking phase, and obviously, you know, some of them are right here, is coming to talk to people, to get a sense of what it's like. If you're an adoptee, to talk to birth parents. If you're a birth parent, talk to an adoptee. Just really learn, read, get some support. And the other aspect of it is, if you are feeling that you're not wanting to take that step right now, a couple of helpful hints in if you decide not to search or decide that it needs some time. And again, the balancing act is real important, because it really is a dance. Even during the search process, you kind of take a step here and stop. Sometimes you take a couple of steps backwards, you take a side step. You go sit down on the sidelines, that type of thing. Sometimes you sit down on the sidelines and think, oh, the world is passing me by, okay? Sometimes you sit down there on the sidelines and just don't believe that it's ever going to, that you're ever going to get up and dance again. There's all kinds of emotions that go through with that. And you need to judge for yourselves, are you putting yourself in such turmoil that maybe you do need to sit on the sidelines and say, I'm sitting out the next X amount of dances. Okay? I'm actually going to take a break from this. There's nothing wrong with that. But one of the real healthy signs is, after you've decided that, you know, the scales you just can't decide, or there's a lot of turmoil, or it's consuming your life, which in many cases it does, That's all part of it, because we're defrosting or we're just plummeting into the need to know, is to say to yourself, you know what? You can't be void of the thoughts, but maybe I'm just going to give myself a 2-month break. Maybe I'm going to give myself a 4-month break or a 1-month break, whatever it might be, and then evaluate it again. So not to take steps towards searching in that amount of time, not to say, I'm upset, I'm not getting the information, or whatever it might be, that when it's coming at you too fast, sit at the sidelines. Sit down and take a rest. That doesn't mean you're stopping. If you frame it in your mind of, I need a rest, it's just going too fast, or I really can't decide, just decide not to decide. And those are important kinds of things, and when I've seen people do that, it's really decreased their turmoil tremendously. Now, that's not solutions per se, but they're helpful steps in trying to make a decision, and also helpful steps not only in the actual should I decide to search, why search, but for the people who want to take the next step, giving yourself that break. Okay. Any comments in regards to, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I searched for my full sibling, and I did it on my own, and actually the search was very short, it was 6 weeks. But I totally immersed myself into it 100% for like 2 weeks. That's all I did, write letters on the phone, reading, and it got to the point at the end of 2 weeks that I couldn't bear to look at the file. I was just saturated with it. And I felt a lot of guilt with doing that, because it had been 40-some years, and although I had only known for a couple of years, I thought that this was my job, that I had to take this on. And fortunately, there was a lady that I was in contact with, an ISC person in Encinitas, California, and she just assisted me so much in letting it go and saying it's okay. And I think that's real important in a search, that you do have someone to talk to, you know, on an ongoing basis, no matter when, what time it is, that someone is available to you that will understand that, because I know from my family, they got really tired of hearing about it.
Yes.
It's like, leave me alone, you know, this, I don't want to hear it anymore.
Yeah, that happens a lot. It consumes us, and at times we're getting a lot of support, but then all of a sudden that support starts to wane, and rightfully so in many cases, because if we're not exactly in it in the same way, it can't consume everyone and shouldn't consume everyone in the same way it does us. And I try not to use a lot of shouldn'ts in my life, but when it comes to the search and when it comes to trying to put the perspective of all the other significant others, it's healthy when the other people try and balance it, because otherwise they're just sucked into it, and we're on a roller coaster and a snowball, and then there's nobody helping us with putting some brakes to it. But then again, there's all kinds of levels of support. Some people can be supportive and not have to help instigate the snowball, but then there's others that are throwing rocks at it as it snowballs. We can't keep the need to search in a nice, stable perspective. It's impossible. So if you're having difficulties with your thoughts being consumed by that, eating changes, sleeping pattern changes, you know, consuming thoughts, whatever, welcome to the club. Okay.
I'd like to introduce something here. For those who are trying to decide to search or not, when you're embarking on making this decision, and let's say you have come to the decision, you know you are going to search, but you're not exactly sure when, do not let someone who has absolutely no knowledge or no connection with adoption in any way, try not to let foolish remarks stop you from making that decision. I had decided to search in 1977 and told someone I was going to do it, and their remark was very insensitive. If your birth family had wanted you to know where they were, they would have found you by now. Well, not ever, like all adoptees, never ever believing to be vindictive when you have completed a search. When I completed my search, I had found my birth mother deceased. But what was very important to me was that my stepfather, her husband, informed me that she searched for me on 2 different occasions. Once when I was 16, she had stopped for fear of what she would find and what she would do if she had found out that my adopted family was not good to me. And also, she didn't want to disrupt my life. The second time she searched, she was in the process of searching when she died. And I called this person afterwards, and I informed them that they were very insensitive in a field that they had no knowledge of, and that in actuality, she had tried to find me. And I think that was real important for me to know that I was not a second-class citizen, and that that I really was wanted. And not only a second-class citizen, but that I really was a worthwhile person, because I've talked to a lot of adoptees, and I'm finding in talking to a lot of birth mothers, not only at this conference, but other ones, that they also felt, I'm not a very worthwhile person. I really don't deserve this. And I think that you need to come to terms with that.
Yeah, I think that's another important feeling that's interweaves with the adoptee sense of self and the birth parents. Do they deserve this? So that's another aspect in the why search. And what motivates a person, or what tips those scales, has a direct component for some people, depending on how conscious or unconscious they are in their feelings, as to, do they deserve this? And the self-esteem of an adoptee at times has been bruised over the years. For some, and the same thing for birth parents. There's all differing degrees. But if adoption or the birth parent experience wasn't part of that, there'd be other bruised and people beaten as well. So we have to recognize that people deserve to know. They really do.
The same line is, I think finally for myself, when I decided to begin to maybe come out of the closet, so to speak, as a birth mother, is you have people that you feel are your support people, you think. And then you find, in my case, a person who I thought was my best friend, and I mean a godmother to her child and everything else, and who knew about my child, and as it turned out, she just happened to name her daughter, my godchild, the same name as my daughter, which made her even more special to me. And I talked about her for so long. She knew I was part of a support group. And when I got to the point of finding my daughter, which I found through her school yearbook, and I found her picture. That's how I found her, was her picture. I didn't even know her name. And wanted to share this with my friend. She became very opinionated and told me I would not approach my daughter. She told me, you will not. And as a result, this person is no longer my friend. Or it's a very surface friendship. And partly maybe it's my fault for allowing her to do that to me. But again, you allow it, and because you feel like you're maybe a little unworthy, or you were a bad person for being a birth parent. And I guess I can't understand why an adoptee should feel that way. You had nothing to do with it. But I understand that you feel that way. But when people are so narrow-minded and self-centered and so opinionated, when they don't know what you're talking about.
That's right. I think part of it, what I've learned from birth mothers, is that you were told how wrong you were. What a disgrace you are to the family, and to this. And for the adoptees, if my own parents didn't want me because of the sealed records and the secrecy, if my own parents didn't want me, I can't be a very worthwhile person.
I think being an adoptee and almost birth mother, my child died during labor, so I never had to go through that process of giving it up for adoption. But I think that being a birth mother changes your entire life, no matter what, at what age or anything. I think it changes you. Your life becomes so different than it ever was before. I mean, you'll be this happy, carefree, 19-year-old person, and then it's never the same. And I think as a birth mother, a lot of us make mistakes during our life that we probably wouldn't have made. I got married young, just things like that. But I think as an adoptee, knowing, having been a birth mother, I don't think I've ever felt resentment towards my birth parents, because I know what motivates you to give a child up. I know, you know, back in '69, the worst thing to be was pregnant. You know, I mean, you know, yeah, you know, it wasn't until the '70s. I remember the first girl in my hometown that kept her baby. I mean, it was just the most amazing thing. And it's terrible. Even though I don't want to, I still, you know, you look at the birth announcements in the paper now, and you see these single girls, and you go, oh,
What
wow.
good?
Yeah, you know, but it just, you know, it changes you forever.
And people think that the hurt goes away. It never goes away.
Oh, not even with me, where I never gave this child up for adoption, but the whole thing.
Circumstance.
I lived in Ohio. My parents shipped me out here, I lived in Ohio, and they shipped me to California. I live in California now. But, you know, that whole thing of where you have to leave and go as far away as you possibly can. I had a friend who was living in California at the time, and she got pregnant. Her parents put her in Michigan. You know, it's that whole thing that you just, you know, it's such a shame. And in fact, to this day, my mother only refers to it as that unfortunate incident.
And those kinds of things, the value judgments, the sense of rejection from family, friends, society, really does interfere with the ability to search in the healthiest kind of circumstances. And very, very, very few people have ideal circumstances to search. Okay? So that has something to do, again, looking at the topic of why search. There's so many different variables, and we would all like a more ideal situation in every part of our lives, at least most of us would, that we have to recognize the expectations of having the people that we would most like support from support us is also unrealistic. And it has nothing to do just with adoption and with search. There are some people in our lives who were there for us, and there are some people in our lives who just put up roadblocks. And if we expect that the roadblocks to go down and to have those people be part of helping us along that smooth road, that's not going to happen. So again, when you look at why search and the healthy signs and the unhealthy signs, be careful as to expecting that along your search, or even if you do locate, that these people who were roadblocks, all of a sudden you're going to resolve a lot of the unfinished business with them. There'll be some changes. Some of it will be more positive and some not. But don't expect, just as, you know, the expectations in regards to the reunion with the particular adoptee or your birth parent, don't expect that these other people, that there's going to necessarily be healing with them face to face. You definitely have the opportunity to do some healing on your own. But you might not get them to say to you what we would like. So that's another grief process. There's a couple of comments.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking that, you know, there's some people in my life that can support me around some things,
Right.
and other people that can support me around other things. But a while back, you were making me think about my own stopping and starting during my search.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what happened was that I would stop and pull back sometimes because there were other things going on in my life or something like that, and I would say to myself, if I found my birth mother today, would I be ready to make that phone call? And I knew that because of certain other things going on in my life, I wasn't going to be able to handle it, and I would stop for a while then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I also stopped because I would get discouraged.
Sure.
Too. But what would always make me start again was the feeling that I couldn't stand later on, feeling that I hadn't given it my best shot
Mm-hmm.
and I had lost out on the opportunity.
Right? What shifts those scales, okay, that the persons need to know that what's unbearable on one end, okay, really pushes the person to the
Back in the other direction.
right, in the other direction. And it's real important to recognize that that's where a lot of the inching towards crossing over that line is coming from. And that's an important process to be aware of, because no matter what happens down the road in post-reunion relationships, to remember that it finally became more unbearable not to know. And those are real important pieces to recognize. One of the other important pieces to recognize is the person's motivation to search from a point of crisis. Okay, that's not necessarily what I sense here from people, at least from your experiences, because even if that's what motivated you, you're still part of a group, you're coming and you're seeing that. But I see people sometimes that they began a search whatever it might be, from a point of crisis, and they never got to a support group until after they have found. And what happens is a person does it in such isolation. You know, for some people, point of crisis might be the death of their adoptive parents. For another, it might be, for a birth parent, the loss of someone significant in their life, or just reading an article in the paper, and all of a sudden, boom, caps off, and it's, you know, horse race to the finish, real quick, and just blocking out everything on as one goes along the line. And as difficult as it is to slow down, I recommend that you take a breather with that, and to look at how caught up is a person in that snowball, how caught up is a person in running that race. Now, I dealt with somebody who found out she was adopted in her early 30s. I also dealt with someone who found out she was adopted when she was 50. One I knew during the process of her search, another I worked with a couple of years later. And what happened is, of course, it was a major trauma. I mean, not being told all those years, and the lie to that is really a devastation. But one had the opportunity to do some reading, to come to support groups, to learn from others, and it kind of put the brakes on a little bit of a slowing down process. So looking at the whys. And again, it's a real dilemma because it's important to know what you're wanting, okay? Many times it's not healthy to just do something because this side isn't as comfortable, okay? But that's what pushes people over the line. But you have to really look at those key things of what am I willing to accept? Am I going to be okay with it? And how do I get okay with it? That's another important question. Not just am I going to be okay, but how do I get okay? So let's open it up for some discussion.
I just wanted to stress, before you search, make sure you are, again, as you pointed out before, whatever the outcome can be. I don't think you're, in your mind, I wasn't totally prepared for what my son didn't say, but implied when I did call him, because of the first reaction from my oldest son when he searched for me. I did not slow down enough to search frantically for my second son, because I figured he would want to meet me which my first son did, and I was not prepared for what I encountered when I did get a hold of him on the phone. I'm still feeling the same after 2 years.
Yeah.
It was rejection, sort of. He didn't slam the phone on me, he didn't listen to me, but
The reunion hasn't gone anywhere after that.
it was 3 minutes from the telephone reunion, and that was it.
And there's a lot of difficulty and a lot of pain.
And I'm having a very difficult time with it. Because when my son searched and found for me, I was blown away when he searched for me. You'll never hear from them the whole window. And the first thing that my oldest son said, why didn't you search for me? And I didn't know I could. No rights, the whole thing. And I didn't want my youngest son feeling that way. And he said, I have no need to know you or anything about you. And then after I hung up, and after a couple of days, after I sort of got my head back on straight, then I got angry. So I started looking at it. I don't care if you want to know or not, you're going to know. I wrote him a letter. I gave him every bit of information that was possible. And he probably was wrong, but he's got it. What he wants to do is subject. He doesn't have to ask any questions. He did not want to meet me or to have brothers. I was not ready for that. I don't know how you prepare yourself for that, but if you can before you start, get ready, because it may happen.
I think one of... I'm sorry.
How old was 24?
Yeah, it's difficult, especially when you had the opposite experience. It can very much put somebody in the mindset of expecting that to happen. But one of the other aspects of it that you're talking about is real important for all of us to remember, that your readiness is not the readiness of the other person. And the aspect of to search is very different than to be found. And for the birth parent, we have to recognize that this is something, for many of them, they're waiting for the adoptee to become of age. Well, that's understandable, but that 18-year-old or 20-year-old or 25-year-old is not of age in the same psychological way that the birth parent is, because many times that adoptee, they're just beginning their adult life. And depending on how much they thought about adoption growing up, or their awareness of the laws, they're just feeling that they can just begin that process. So they're just beginning it, in many cases, psychologically, and they're at a very different developmental spot in their life than the birth parent is, most likely. When we're talking about birth parent and search for adult adoptee, okay? I'm not talking about minor search right now. But for the birth parent, they're at a very different stage in their life. Okay, their children, if they have children already growing up, going through different passages, thinking about how old that adult is, the birth parent's going through menopause, you know, they're already reflecting on some of this stuff. And here's this adoptee just starting out, and they're not at the same spot. So there's a lot of different dilemmas to recognizing is all the preparation that the people here are doing, or the ones who've already searched. We're finding people that even if psychologically they thought about it, they didn't have that opportunity to sort out, am I ready? Am I willing to do this? Sure, and for many people, it's a wonderful opportunity to be found. I mean, it's just a great feeling, but it still brings up the aspect of shock. If we're shocked to make that initial call, and we've been preparing for how many months or how many years, I mean, let's face it, no wonder there's instability in relationships to begin with, and sometimes for a couple of years after that.
I had an interesting thing happen. I found my daughter. I didn't contact her. She was 21, 22. I knew where she worked. I played, you put on the dark glasses, I spied her. I found her.
we have some...
Stages. And at first yeah, you know, at first you just want to see they're alive. You make all the excuses,
Right.
and then you want to see what they look like, and then you want to maybe talk to them, and I did. I talked to her in a lineup in a cafeteria, which was kind of fun, and she didn't know who I was, and that was enough. Each time it was enough. It was enough to just make that contact little by little. But then I'm involved in a parent and adoptee support group. She walked into the meeting.
Oh my God.
What do you do then? I'm sitting in the front row and I'm running.
What did you do?
I chain smoked. I sat there and she walked in front of me and sat behind me.
Holy.
And that was really, my heart, I nearly had a cardiac arrest on the spot. And I grabbed the woman and said, go see what she wants. Talk to her. Go and do something with her. Find out why she's here. You know, is she searching? I mean, all my joys would be fulfilled. She's searching for me and I'm here. And, you know. So Joan, my friend, walked around at the break. You know, welcome to Parent Finders. You know, why are you here? Oh, I'm not looking for anyone. She said, I'm just with my friend. She's an adoptee. And this friend of mine said, you know, funny things have happened. She said, you know, sometimes mothers could be in the same room. No, she said, that's impossible. Anyway, I'm not looking for anyone. So this went on. She left. I was left too, you know, a jellyfish. I mean, what do you do? That was very hard, and I didn't contact her for ages. I thought, well, she doesn't want to find me. You know, I know where she is. What did I want out of this search? She's alive. I know that. What do you do then? It took a long time to contact her, another year, and a letter, and her boyfriend phoned me and said, she's very upset. You sent her a letter. You know, blah, blah, blah. I want to just protect her. I'm going to marry her. You know, and all this stuff. Anyway, finally I met her, and it was a superb reunion. It was the actual meeting. It was great. It was lovely. I married her father. I have 3 children. Sibs, full sibs. Then what, you know? I told her then, from my experience, I said, you may be very angry with me. I can't take back the clock 1 second. I'm sorry. You know, what I did when I did it at the time, it was the right decision. I can't change that. You know, I can only say I'm sorry that it happened, but...
How long ago did you have this reunion?
14 months ago. But I'd known for 3 years before that. Yeah, no, she did. She looks like my husband's family. I mean, she's identical to all my children. They all look the same. Now, I went to her wedding last September, and her adoptive mother found me, and she's lovely. And she was expecting to find a trunk. I mean, that was, you know, we met at McDonald's for coffee, and we were all in our best behavior, in our best clothes. I didn't smoke, and I sat polite. I told her I'd been to the same convent as her sisters, and she'd gone to the same convent as my sister-in-law, and we were all very polite. We sipped our coffee and exchanged photographs. It was all very, you know, I mean, we're adults. What do you do? And at the end, she said, you know, I think I probably would have done the same if I'd been in her shoes. However, I said to my daughter when we met,
how does your adopted mom feel about my searching for you? And she said, you know what she said to me? She said, I waited until I was married. You know? She was 10 years older than me, from a slightly more conservative time. Maybe she did wait till she was married. But I mean, that was her little bit of, I mean, she has to have a defense too. But since then, I have not approached my daughter because she has just got married. I make all sorts of excuses. But she isn't ready. She isn't ready, so no, she will. I really sense when she's 24, but she's a young 24. I'm 44. I see it differently. I've known her all her life in my mind. She never knew me. You know?
She didn't meet your husband or your kids?
No, not yet.
And she's aware that your husband
She
and
has
your father-
driven by. She's parked in front of our house. She's looked at my husband. She's seen my children.
This is a dance in its own way, and sometimes it's very painful.
It is, and therefore you sublimate it by going and working with other birth mothers and other adults.
Right,
You know,
right.
hear all those angles and stories, and you know.
And those are ways to help heal and also to sit and wait. Because as you talked about in the back row, you've made the information available for your son. We have to decide at times, when do we stop making the contacts? And for some of us who have been around for a while, we know that there are people continuously making contacts. Week after week a letter, postcard after postcard, phone call, and it loses its potency because what happens, at least in my experiences, it's not any longer an issue of adoption and birth parent reunion. It's an issue of control, and it's an issue of intrusion.
The other person just gets more and more defended.
Yes, absolutely, and just moves back. Right. So we have to pace it. And my recommendation to people is, when your gut says, I've tried, they've got the information, they know where I am, give it a rest. That doesn't mean forever wait for that person to then approach, but give it some rest, because that way you kind of let the other person, hopefully it jiggles a little things within them, just as you're saying your daughter.
Last week was her birthday. I sent her flowers. I mean,
That's lovely. Mm-hmm.
well brought up. She should have sent me a thank you.
And it's
But if she doesn't, I know why. And when I told her that she would probably or could possibly be angry with me, she came to my home, she saw how her brothers and sisters live, and she knows we have a nice house and we're happy, blah, blah, all that stuff. I knew there would be an anger or a resentment for what she could have had, perhaps. And I told her that, and she called me the week later, and she said, I'm really happy you told me that, but because she said, I was just a little angry. And I said, it's okay, it's okay.
recognizing those feelings, it's a very complicated, I would say, I've not lived being a non-adoptee in a reunion, but it is one of the most complicated things that people go through, is the decision to search and going through that process and then going through the aftermath of reunion, which is lifelong. It's also one of the most valuable experiences in growing. And when one prepares, and again, one can never completely be prepared. Don't expect that. Just like we talk about preparing adoptive families. We can give them all kinds of reading material and everything at the beginning, but you know what? They're going to need help along the life cycle. Just as we as adoptees and birth parents need to recognize that it's not going to be in a little package. You're not going to have a light that says, go. Okay, that this is going to be the clear signal to search. But the more that you come out of the closet, and adoptees come out of the closet also, the more that we can be better prepared. What I'd like for some of the people who are the first-time attendees, for the ones who are contemplating search, is some of this helpful to you? Do you have particular questions?
I didn't really contemplate search until I walked in the door yesterday.
Ah.
I really kind of came across this conference just because I walked in the Daily Plaza about a couple weeks ago, and there were people there, and I was handing the brochure, and I am an adoptee. I'm also a psychologist, and I've had some interest in working with adopted families, and I've had a little bit of experience, but haven't really pursued it. But I've always kind of thought, well, maybe I'll pursue it and get educated in the area and make it my specialty. And so I really came here more as kind of from a professional standpoint, and I realized yesterday when I left, I mean, all kinds of things were stood up for me. People were like, what's wrong with you, you know?
You walked in the door as a professional and boom, the heat hit and you're just defrosting and here's your adoptee self coming through.
And I don't like, I guess I really wasn't, I didn't know what really to expect. Just hearing everybody's stories just kind of got me starting to think, and also having, you know, kind of going back in my lifetime in times I've kind of thought and fantasies and wondered. And I don't know, I mean, right now I don't know if it's something that I want to do or something I don't want to do. I don't know, but I'm in the question of it now.
You don't have to decide in 2 days.
Thank you.
No, absolutely.
You had said before that you were a professional and so forth, but also an adoptee, and I kept wanting to ask you why you did that search. And I just really believe, because of so many things that happened to me with my search for my daughter and in my lifetime, that maybe this is a door opening for you. Sometimes it takes some little thing to stir up something. Yeah, and you know, this could be the opening of a whole thing for you. I want to be your birthday butterfly.
This is what's real special. This is what's real special about these kinds of meetings, not just the opportunity to learn in a formal kind of way, but to connect with people that you're sitting next to. And you commented about you're feeling the butterflies. That's understandable and normal. And I worry about the people who don't have butterflies, because what's happened then for the people who don't have butterflies, this is my theory, is that they're denying it them, or they're frozen, or they're just pushing them away, or whatever other psychological term we want to use, because any new thing that we're venturing into an unknown causes some kinds of heightening of feelings. And if we don't have any of those heightening of feelings, then we're blocking something. And the more aware we are of our butterflies, and I can assure you, even though I'm 8 years post-reunion, I can remember those butterflies, and they weren't just butterflies, they were, oh, right, you know, this terror and the scares, but also excitement and anticipation and all other kinds of things. It's a very bittersweet, complicated type of an issue that just propels people. What?
I just want to say that, to underline that it's never over. I mean, I'm an even older veteran than you are. I found my birth mother 14 years ago, and she just died in December, so that's a new thing. But I had 14 years of knowing her. And it's not, and I'm sitting here teary, and it's not over her dying. It's like, this is still all real important to me.
Yeah, I'm sorry about your loss.
Yeah, but there's always something more.
And hearing about it, and I like what you had to say, that even though right now your daughter's not responding, what you're doing with your time is you're participating in groups. Right, it really does help that.
And I guess maybe the thing that made me teary was the thing about being with each other. You know, that was, I feel that was as important a connection for me to make with other adoptees and with birth parents.
Without the support of, Linda and I are in the same group in Michigan, and without the support of those people, and not only birth parents, but adoptees also, I don't think I could have made it.
Right. I feel it was as important for me as meeting my birth mother.
Yeah, that sense, if I can take off on what you're talking about, the sense of connectedness, not only in what people gain from having a reunion, even if it's not something that they really, you know, pictured for the outcome, the sense of connectedness and validating, as you talked about the need to tell your child why, the need for a birth parent to tell another adoptee has nothing to do with that particular person's child that they released. The need to connect. I know when I went into the first AIM meeting in Detroit about 9-10 years ago, flood of feelings that I can't even, and I'm not a shy type, I can't even describe that. It was one of the most overwhelming experiences in my life to be part of. I felt connected. I felt in a very different way, but a similar way to the reunion, of an aspect of, I have a sense of belonging. Even though it was a real upheaval to be in a room with other birth parents at the same time as connecting with other adoptees, but then the birth parents connect with you and vice versa, and it validates a lot of what we grew up with. And for the birth parent, the same thing, meeting other people who have a sense of, you're not a bad person, we like you, You can be in here. You have a right. For an adoptee, to help us with our shame, to help us with our acceptance that we are meeting other people, not only other adoptees. So even if you decide not to embark on a search, or you have a variety of upheavals with your post-reunion, just as I talked about taking a rest from the reunion, belong to a group, get connected. That doesn't mean you have to be in it for life, okay? Even though, some of us feel like lifers. But be in it for a while, get some of your needs met, then take a rest if and when you need, and then connect again. Because even if it's not a reunion, that's your end result. I work with people every day that are contemplating reunions or coming and saying, I don't want to search right now, whether it be because their child's a minor or an adoptee, and that's just a small piece. Believe it or not, as much as we're all talking search a reunion, and let me tell you, it was a big piece in my life at that point in time, it is still only a piece within the whole picture. We have to heal. We have a lot of things we need to heal around, and reunion is one piece.
I think it's very healing and educational to be involved with other people who have gone through similar experiences, because nobody else feels what you feel like. I'm an adult adoptee, and I'm still friends with the very first birth mother I met.
Right.
And I prepared myself beforehand by reading books, and it was really so wonderful meeting a birth mother and seeing she wasn't what I thought the birth mothers were years back going along the way. However, I also would like to say, as an adoptee, I think unless you're really ready, that first encounter or searching or meeting, it really would make it very difficult. I know in my 20s I never would have been, my response was totally different, and I wasn't ready to search till I was in my 40s. I guess a 40 crisis, and then I started reading everything on adoption and said, now's my time, and I was ready. But then there's always issues dealing with adoption, and I don't think it ever ends. Because even though my search is over, and I just met my father's birth family here, I'm still dealing with that. My mother died when I was born, and my father died maybe when I was 5. And all these issues, and dealing with, not getting all the answers, and trying to get pieces together. So, it's difficult. I find it still difficult trying to work these things out.
Sometimes,
It's not the only answer.
no, it's not.
You have to keep on going on, putting it together.
Absolutely, and it's also important, and you've heard me give all the plugs for the support groups, and I'm an active member. It's also important to recognize that for some people, they might need some professional help. Just as if we weren't adopted, or if we weren't birth parents, there might be certain barriers, certain struggles in our lives that we need to seek some professional help. And a couple of helpful hints with that, because in this day and age, the understanding of post-adoption issues is not a common aspect, in everybody's realm of professional experiences. And it would be nice if you found someone who was educated and had connections in that type of level of understanding. It's also important for each of you to recognize that if you did need that help, that you can help to educate the professional by giving them some books. Bless you. You can help do that by giving them some books to read, some information about the variety of issues, and what you need to look for is someone who can help you deal with loss, can help deal with shame, can help deal with just getting to feel better about oneself and sorting things out. So there's different ways to check out a mental health practitioner in your area if they're willing to learn, if they're willing to, they don't have to have that expertise, because if you feel they do, they're very far and few between to find. But to check them out, and also recognize that for many people in the process of search, either they've already thought about seeking some outside help, or once you start getting into the feelings about it, sometimes the feelings can be so consuming that they scare someone. And even though it's a very normal process to have, some sleep disturbances, or looking in the shopping center and seeing people, and we can all, list hundreds of different kinds of things that affect us as things start to bubble within us. But going to someone to talk to them, even on a short-term basis, can be helpful. That does not mean that someone's going crazy, but sometimes talking to someone who at least recognizes that that's part of the normal process. And again, I'm not saying that if you don't have some difficulties that something's wrong. Everybody handles the newness and the resurfacing and the triggering of issues in a different way, but let me assure you that many, many people who are either in the process of search or have already dealing with reunions, that they do need, and it's beneficial to have some of that professional help. And if anybody would like to comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I may be wrong, but I think the safest bet is to ask the people in the local adoptee support group who they go to
Right.
with their therapist,
Right.
and who have they found helpful to them.
Absolutely,
But
right.
I've had members in the group who have gone to their psychiatrist or whoever they're dealing with, and the psychiatrist says, I don't think you should be searching. Why would you open up that can of worms? You know, you think that's why you have to be careful. That's
Right. Right. Yeah. So if you have a search and support group that you're connected with, and if there's one in the community, then you can get some information from them as to who to use. If you don't have that kind of vehicle, then, and it's the same kind of advice I give for adoptive parents in communities, you know, how do you look for someone? You don't always have to have someone who has that expertise, but if they've dealt with divorce situations, if they've dealt with people who've had losses in their lives, and they can normalize those kinds of things. In the back? I know, I'm sorry.
One of my adoptive friends who was struggling with the slight, semi-rejection from her birth mother, I went through that with her, and she was going to a therapist that really and genuinely helped her deal with her situation. And after my oldest son found me, and then had a cooling off period of about 3 months, and I'd fallen apart. He didn't tell me he wanted a cooling off period. The search was made, and then I sat for 3 months. And unbeknownst to me why this was happening, I went to see the therapist, and she did help me because I needed somebody because I couldn't do it. You know, when you get that call and you have that reunion, you're not ready when you're on the other end of the phone. And it was very difficult to deal with emotionally. You know, what did I do wrong? What did I say? And I wasn't going to call him. I couldn't. Not would have been before. You know, the whole thing. And I really had a very difficult 3 months. I thought I was losing my mind. My husband thought I was losing my mind. My children thought I had cancer. You know, everybody thought I was. I didn't know what was going on. I was so consumed with this whole entire thing. Every part of my body was tied up in this being found. Eating, sleeping, drinking, even driving the car. All I could think about was Jim, and the fact that he was 6 foot, 200, very good looking young man who had gone from a 7-pound baby the last time I saw him. And it was more than I could handle emotionally, and I felt very good therapist. And the adopter that had gone to her said, Pat, you've got to talk to somebody, because I wasn't that as a son yet. It wasn't until right after I got normal again, so to speak, that I went to support. But I'm very glad that I had that, because I wasn't the only one that was going to this. I was afraid of it.
It's real important.
It was very helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. How many people in here are social workers that do not wear another hat? Okay, a couple of people. One of the things that's real interesting about coming to this kind of a conference, and I've seen changes over the years that I've been part of it, is that there's a lot of feelings, obviously, you know, that Triad members have towards the social work profession. And I wear 2 hats, okay, and try and balance it and juggle it. And as a comment of support, that sometimes Triad members take out a lot of their unresolved feelings and anger and resentment towards the particular social workers who are here. And even though you're not responsible not only for the policies and procedures totally of how the agencies run now, you sure weren't 20 and 30 and 40 years ago. So one of the things that's real important is to recognize that this is one of the most interesting kind of conferences for a professional to come to from a grassroots organization. And I specifically had a show of hands, not to put you both on the spot, but to ask the different members here in the group that in the next couple of days, if you see them, give them a hello, a little support, and to recognize that things are changing, that many times the professionals are here to learn why. They're not here to stop what we're wanting to do in regards to heal. But the reason I'm saying that is that there's some people here that have been coming to conferences for a while, and that there's been lots of different feelings. There's lots of different aspects of, we want to teach the professionals, but we're mad at them. So we have that double bind. So just be gentle.
okay? And also for the professionals to recognize that sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and recognize that it's not a direct comment towards you. And let me assure you, I mean, I'm an adoptee, but I'm also a social worker, and I can get some of those kind of comments, and you just kind of got to toughen up a little bit with it.
Well, I appreciate your addressing this, and I think that I was a little bit nervous about coming, quite frankly. I was told by my supervisor I had to attend this because as part of my, I've been working in adoption about 6 years, but it was only in the last year that I've been one of the workers. I've come from the state of Virginia, and we have court-ordered searches. And I'm one of the social worker staff who must do court-ordered searches, and I also handle the calls and the searches for non-identifying birth information. So, you know, I feel that I'm the one who people get on the phone for the first time, and so I really needed to know more about what I'm doing because the agency cannot train us in this. I mean, we're told what steps you take in attempting to do a search, that kind of thing, but it's only through experience, you know, and meeting with others that you have the slightest idea of what the dynamics of that you're dealing with.
That's right. And I really respect and appreciate your openness with that because it's not an easy conference to come to, even someone voluntarily who's working in the area of post-adoption who wants to come, because if they come year after year, then it's a familiar, friendly social worker face, okay? And then they're kind of included. But coming for the first time, there are those kinds of feelings, but I'd be more than happy to talk to any of the professionals as well who are dealing with that kind of service in their organization as to some of the very simple kinds of things that we do in beginning phone calls. We have letters that we put together, just the first friendly voice of, I know that this is a difficult step for you. And then also to recognize that many times the adoptee birth parent, adoptive parent don't truly present themselves to that first-time caller in the same way that they would being here at a convention, and the richness of what we can get. So I'd be more than happy for the people who are dealing with that in their agencies to try and help them over the bumps.
And I'd like to say something on behalf of social workers. I've been in the movement since 1983, and my first contact was with a social worker at Catholic Charities as a birth mother in 1970. And left to say a bad taste in my mouth would be a gross understatement. My first conference was in 1986, and I was in total amazement at how much social workers had become more human. And at that conference, I had the pleasure of meeting and spending time with Linda, and found out that they are very human. And I think, as somewhat of a veteran, we welcome social workers to become more versed in our feelings, whether you be a birth mother, an adoptee, adoptive parent, or wear all three hats. And I would love to talk with you later.
I'm a birth mother and a social worker, and became a social worker because when I went away to the unwed mother's home, as they call it, Florence Crittenden home, I was assigned to a social worker that was just terrible, horrible and slut. And the only way to redeem yourself, the only choice you have is you give this child up, and then it's over, and you go on with your life. And I remember thinking, well, I'm going to go out there, and I'm going to be a social worker, and come back and do what I have yet to work in the field of adoption. This is my first conference, and my life has changed now. I'm 40. I feel like, well, there's a new start in just starting a search and a career change.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Where did you deliver? Which Florence Crittenden?
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay. I was born in Detroit, Florence Crittenden. Thought I might find my birth mother's roommate.
Well, would you advise adoptive parents to come to, well, for instance, I have an adopted sister. My sister-in-law had adopted 2 children, okay? And she lives in the suburb of Detroit. And I would have said to her, I think it would be more important for her to come to meetings with adult adoptees and see what they're feeling and experiencing, instead of going to groups with adoptive parents, because they will give support in some ways too, but more just what they want to hear, I think.
I think-
Opposed to what is it coming from the other side, adoptees and birth mothers.
I think they need a combination. Adoptive parents need a combination, just as we as adoptees need to connect sometimes just with adoptees and then broaden it. And depending on the readiness of the adoptive parents, that they can get a smattering of it all at different times. And we'd be more than happy to give you the name of our organization, Detroit, our search group, which is also a search and support group, plus our agency runs a lot of community education. And part of that is strictly for adoptive parents, but then we'll have, you know, the same typical kinds of things. We'll have panels of adult adoptees, and we'll have round group discussions and that type of thing. I think adoptive parents need it all, just like we as adoptees need to connect sometimes with someone else's adoptive parents. We get a handful of them coming to our meetings, and it's wonderful because it validates just what we were talking about before. It's so important to connect with each other. It's also important for an adoptive parent to learn from other adoptees and vice versa.
I was going to say, I was one of the co-founders of the Hours organization today. One is Minnesota. And we have run panel discussions with adult adoptees, with parents, and we always have a smattering of adoptive parents that will show you that something is kind of very in the back of their mind. And in spring, we had an adoption option conference, and for the first time, we had a birth parent panel. So I'm out of the closet now. I carried some people down there, and you'd be surprised with the respective adoptive parents left. We had a survey sheet, and the birth parent panel was the highest rated. And I went all right to the ask again if we repeat it, you know, next year, so we have it every year. So now they're willing to look, I think we're getting a different type of adoptive parent coming in. That's not this old way of thinking. And it made me feel really good. And a lot of questions were asked. There's a lot of back and forth questions, answers. And it was very healthy.
That's validating of our experiences. That's so important of members of the adoption triad.
One of the prospective parents, which was really funny, because it was myself and I, and of course Kate Ross, and we had my friend's daughter who was 17 now, but she delivered when she was 16. And one of the prospective parents stood up and said, you know, I'm just amazed that all of you look the way you do. We didn't expect you to look that way. I always felt so like I'm not saying enough. And it was just hysterical. This was their perception of what birth parents look like. It just
Yeah, that perception, that fantasy and the scares, not only in the education that we do in the community, but for the people who need to look at doing some of the exercises in preparation to the why search and to the motivation, is also to fathom up, not just, you know, what's the worst that you imagine can happen and what do you want to happen, okay, but what is it that you expect this person to be like, what you want that person to be like, and we all have some of those expectations. In regards to some of the people who are in the process of searching, can I have a show of hands as well? Okay, in the process of searching, and the ones who are contemplating to search. Okay. Haven't even gotten to the point of contemplating. That's fine. That's fine. Don't push yourself in that. We need to end in a couple of minutes, and I want to first.
or
They're searching for birth parents.
children, birth parents. They're searching.
Okay. We're going to end in a couple minutes, but I want to just make sure that if there's any questions of the particular people who are still either contemplating or whatever, that we can address some of what's left with that.
Have you ever dealt with minor search?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know,
Do we have another week?
She had a question.
Okay.
It's just a minor one. I just...
This marks the end of session 22, tape 1. Now turn to session 22, tape 2.
I guess I've never felt a loss, or I've never felt grief. I was adopted by a Jewish family. My family is very Jewish looking. I was raised Jewish. I always felt that I kind of looked a little different than everybody. I was just kind of, you know, blonde, blue-eyed, and everybody had real dark hair, and you know, and I'd look around and go, God, you know, where? And my parents never told me until I was 21 that I was adopted. I kind of always felt that I was adopted because of the circumstances. I was born in Chicago. I was raised, you know, my parents lived in California. I have a brother who's 18 years older than me. So I always thought I was adopted, but never told it really until I was 21. But I have to admit, I've never felt that grief or that loss of that person. I don't know if being a birth mother, you know, because I know what it feels like to have to give a child up or feel that you have to give a child up, that has kind of calmed me in that aspect or what. But I didn't really start searching until I was in my 30s, and then for medical reasons, and that's always really good, which I talked to the doctor that delivered me, and he said, well, there's nothing, I mean, really, medical problems have nothing to do with your hereditary. And I said, you've got to be kidding, your medical, but no, that was basically what spurred me on. And then, as I got more into it, it's got to be that I have a right to know who I am.
I think that those are, I appreciate the comment. In regards to the issues of loss and grief, they hit us in different ways. There's active grieving and there's active recognition of loss issues. Bless you. One of the things that we don't need to look for things that aren't necessarily there, for one thing, but it's a whole process. And when we talk so much about loss and grief and anger, those don't necessarily have to be conscious thoughts and feelings that are connected to adoption. For example, growing up and going to the doctor, I know what I experienced. I could be sitting in the examining room, and he might be asking my mother a question, you know, does this run in the family? Well, I don't know. She's adopted. Okay, or you know, you don't look like your family, or how comes your brother's so tall, or you know, a variety of different things. It doesn't necessarily trigger with, that's a loss issue, I don't have that information, but it kind of hits a person and then gets in there deeper. So the loss issues don't necessarily have to be something where somebody is grieving them openly. They don't necessarily have to be causing someone difficulties in their day-to-day life, but the same thing with grief. One of the things that I've learned that adoptees at times do not grieve until they start to search or they even have a reunion, because depending on how defended they are or depending on the fact that sometimes one doesn't get in touch with grief issues till you know what you lost. And it's a very interesting kind of a process. So if you're not in touch with that, or you don't have them per se, that's okay. If you have other things that are motivating you, then that's what you need to just get in touch with. But one of the things that I learned for myself is that it surfaced for me, again, when I had my daughter almost 13 years ago. It surfaced when other friends were having kids. It surfaced just around a variety of different things. And I couldn't necessarily say I experienced loss and grief at that point in time. It stirred stuff up, okay? And that stirring of stuff is very difficult to separate, because some of the stuff might be sadness, some of the stuff might be just, I don't know. And I'm sad that I don't know. But being sad that I might not know doesn't necessarily mean that I'm actively mourning on an outward basis. That it just could be a sense of self, a sense of missing pieces, as we had talked about before. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I would connect with that and say that, like your experience in the doctor's office, one of the ways in which I got stirred up, though it didn't feel like mourning, was to be really fascinated with looking at parents and children who look like each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, walk onto an elevator and you see a mother and a daughter, and you think, what would it have been like to grow up looking like somebody?
Mm-hmm.
You know, walking around with somebody I look like?
Mm-hmm.
That is something,
exciting.
that is something I missed out on. I
Right,
missed out on that.
right. So missing out on not having someone that looks like you is a loss. That doesn't mean that that loss is actively being grieved or even needs to actively be grieved at a certain time. But that is a loss. And one of the other issues that I know for adoptees is, just as with anybody, by circumstances, they're with that family. But there's additional kind of unusual circumstances that an adoptee happens to be with this family than another family who might have been closer to the top of the list, or whatever it might be. And it's a very interesting kind of experience, because when we talk about fantasies for adoptees growing up, again, consciously or unconsciously, what I look at is how many of us who weren't adopted looked at Mrs. Jones down the block and thought, oh, Johnny's mother is just cool. All right, that would be really good if we lived. I mean, who didn't want to have this other person down the block, or somebody that we thought was just going to be more cooler or whatever it was? It's a loss for adoptees because for many of them, they just feel kind of placed there. Not necessarily at certain times growing up, because it depends on what story you were told. And if you feel that you were chosen, but eventually, conceptually, and again, we all do different things with this, but I truly believe, looking back and reflecting on my life and the work that I do professionally with adoptees, is that somewhere along the line, they recognize that they're there just because of certain circumstances.
Randomly assigned.
Randomly assigned. Now, I know in talking to my non-adopted friends that the reality is that they were randomly conceived, okay? That if they wouldn't be who they are if their parents conceived 3 months earlier or 3 months later. So there's a certain kind of randomness, but there's a differentness to that randomness. And it, again, depending on one's sense of thinking about it in that way, can create some different feelings, and those feelings don't have to mean that they're causing someone undue problems. Okay.
I just want to say, my son at 17 and my daughter at 7, people comment, God, they look just like you, even if they don't know they're adopted. And it's just hysterical, because they're from South America, and I mean, you know, my little girl goes, they must be brother and sister. Matthew goes, yep, that's my sister. They're from two completely different families. And it's just, you know, I think, I don't know, it's just, my kids just think it's a riot.
Well, you know, you start to look like your husband after. So it's not like you're living in your household for that long a period of time.
We're gonna end in just a minute. I have one other hand.
Do you have any idea what percentages of adoptees become birth mothers? Relationship between that?
It's a great question. I wish that there was more information on it. To be honest with you, I'm sure we could take some poll, but they're, I feel, absolute impossible statistics to ever gather, because we can see here from coming to the national conventions and looking within our own community, the people who are out and involved address that. But just like we can't come up with any stats as to how many birth parents are really searching, how many adoptees are really searching, we don't have that pool to know. And I don't know if it's really a misproportionate amount or not, but even if it's not a misproportionate amount, and if it's the same percentage across the entire population, it's an extra dilemma, it's an extra dynamic, and it's an extra issue for the adoptee who becomes pregnant, for the adoptee who becomes pregnant, continues to parent, or chooses to release, because it's all triggering, consciously or unconsciously, that other experience for themselves. I'd like to thank everybody for your participation, your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're welcome.
Gina, like I said, I'm a social worker. Do you recommend anything like